did they teach you about money? I would not want Nick to intubate me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Banter at the Bedside. We are here today with a very special episode. We're hoping that there will be two parts to this, but first we are talking today about finances, specifically aimed for those nurses. How do we talk about finances in healthcare? How can we prepare? These are well-paying jobs, and yet we all seem to have a side hustle. Why is that? So we are joined today with very good guests, but before I introduce them, let me get through our disclaimers. First, this is not medical advice. Please seek the care of your own medical professional. All of our thoughts and opinions are our own. We do not represent any entity at all. As always, I'm one of your main co-hosts. I'm Abby. I'm a nurse practitioner of 8 years, been in healthcare 17 years now. Oof. And this is not one of my strong topics, so I'm excited to learn with you. We're joined by Kaleigh, our other main co-host, an ICU nurse of 18 years now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
Our two guests today, we have Michael coming back, nurse practitioner. He was on one of our first episodes, ICU Then versus Now. And he has been in healthcare since 1985, and he became a nurse practitioner in 2000. He's specialized in cardiology and critical care throughout his journey in healthcare, and one of his main passions is helping educate young nurses on their financial future. And then we're joined today by Nick. He is the founder of Testament Wealth Management and is a certified financial planner. So we got someone not fully in healthcare, but Nick still understands the ins and outs, particularly for the nurses, because his wife is a nurse. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to be here again.
So I think this is an interesting topic. We've kind of been talking about doing this kind of financial series. Why are all these side hustles in medicine when they are such good paying jobs? I kind of wanted us to open up just with a bit of a question of what's one thing in your financial history that you wish you did different. And I'm hoping that this gives Nick a little bit to kind of guide us. And I'll start. I didn't have undergraduate loans. I was very blessed and I didn't need to have any. I got some scholarships. I had help from my parents. But when I went to go and get my master's, I needed loans. And someone told me, just take out whatever they give you. So I got all of these federal loans and I took out everything that I was offered, even though that was way beyond what covered the school, and I was working full time. And now looking back, I'm like, that was probably not the best advice. So I'm still paying off student loans. I will, because I decided to go back for my doctorate too. But that time I did not take out the maximum amount that I was offered, only what I was needed. Does anyone else have a financial thing that they wish they didn't different or knew back then?
Well, one thing that Gwen and I have talked about is, as new in our career, is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. We bought our first house. We bought a brand new house because we had to be in the new neighborhood, and we could afford it when we really could have bought my Uncle Melvin's house for much less and still had a nice house. And, we've thought back, wow, if we had just because we could afford it didn't mean we had to afford it.
Mine kind of goes along with that, Michael. I let myself be talked into a car payment in a car when I didn't need a new car. But, car people think they know everything. Not the people at the dealership, the people that like cars in life work on them, maybe. But I feel like that would have been probably a better decision. And I do regret not maybe travel nursing for a couple of years before I had my kids, just to help make some extra money to help pay off some stuff.
Yeah. And I think the car payment is rather common. Recently, I spoke at UNC Chapel Hill. They had a financial symposium, spoke to the students there, graduate and undergrad. And I was looking into car payments, and the average car payment right now in America is about $530 with an interest rate of 11%. And that's just the average, which is bizarre. So that can certainly set you behind a lot. And a lot of times when you go to buy a car, the car salesman will ask, well, what do you want to pay a month? Not how much do you want to go in debt, what interest rate can we have, but how much do you want to pay a month, which is, I don't want to say borderline illegal, but it's bad. We should understand how much we're going into debt and what that, interest rate is and for how long that payment is and what the flip side of what you're giving up if you commit to that. Not as hardcore as Dave Ramsey, and that I don't think you should buy every car in cash, but there should be a healthy balance to, not going too far in debt so fast.
I've had bad cars.
No, that's the thing. The second I did that, guess what? Somebody hit me and it totaled it. The whole saga.
When I was a new grad nurse, I think it was 2013, and I think I had a 2003 Buick LeSabre. And the window was broken, and I had to hold the window sometimes when I was driving, and the heat didn't work, but I didn't care because I lived in North Carolina, so it didn't matter. But I will say I'm glad I drove that thing into the ground, because for I think 3 years living down here, I drove that thing despite my mechanic wanting me to not drive it. But do all of these kind of sound like common things that especially young people come to you about, Nick? Kind of give us a little bit into that step us into that financial world.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it depends and is behavioral in the fact that, a lot of mistakes people make is made out of just uneducation. The financial literacy in America is very bad and very low. Because of that, people get talked into, buying annuities they don't need, buying a house they can't afford, buying a car they can't afford, because they don't understand the full picture. They say, hey, I want this, and I don't really care what it takes to get there. So especially with the car payment, and, a lot of people buy homes that they can't afford now. Obviously, rates are, high, home prices are high. So, I think renting gets a bad rap too. It's okay to rent sometimes. So I think being fluid, just, not having rigid rules, and being fluid in, what is the environment that you're in, what your situation is incredibly important as well. So, those are incredibly common. I've heard a lot worse, but I think, mistakes typically are bred out of not being educated enough in what you're making a decision in. I think that flows too into one of the reasons, you put on there, why are healthcare workers so bad at talking about money? I think one is because this doesn't apply to everybody, but after, the last 10 years of working with doctors and dentists and neurosurgeons and you name it, it's because they think they know everything. And I think that can be said about a lot of professions, but nurses and doctors and dentists and surgeons are very, very, very smart. But also we need to understand that we're subject matter experts in that specific field. And so, when we take a step out of that, my wife was an ICU nurse for, a number of years, if something happens to me, I'm not going to chat GPT it or look online or do, find a Reddit forum on how to fix myself. I'm going to go to the hospital. And I think a lot of times maybe people don't want to pay for an advisor. They don't want to admit that they don't know everything. They don't want a second or third opinion. I think that's incredibly important to have a sounding board in your life that, hey, that is their specialty, right? Especially, surgeons, they are incredibly talented and they're incredibly smart and they're really good at what they do. And it's not easily replicated. And I think that should be, kind of the standard for a lot of other fields, whether it's attorneys or advisors or, what have you. Just the rise of, AI and ChatGPT and do-it-yourself investors has really bred a lot of bad mistakes that I see these days. And, I think the first thing that leads to not making a lot of those mistakes is the, humility in that, hey, maybe I don't know everything.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think too, it's hard to admit that I'm an expert in this one area, but then in this other area, maybe I don't know quite as much.
I don't think they want to know. 22, you're making money now.
Yeah.
I don't think they want to know what to do with it that would actually help them, because that means they can't go on a vacation every 6 months or all the other fun stuff. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely
that's a good point. I'm sorry. It's a good point Haley makes about.
No, go ahead, Michael.
Haley's my daughter. Kaleigh makes about, I've got this money but the reality is that I was just reading the average nurse salary in the country now is more than double the median salary in our country. So nurses make good money, up from there even more, of course. So really you have money to go have fun and do things, but still prepare for when your hair is my color and you're looking at retirement. So you really have money for both. They just don't realize it sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we saw a lot of what Kaleigh was talking about during some of that COVID nursing money too.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely saw people that left and got, was getting that COVID travel money and got remodels done and cars. And then when that dried up, I think that's another piece too, is there is good travel money and we have some of these high times, but it's not always there. And I remember at 22, for just a day-to-day example, I became very reliant on overtime shifts in my budget for the month. And then some months they didn't need me on that overtime shift and I'd be called off and I'd be like, ooh, guess we're eating ramen this week, or guess I better find some guy to take me out on a date this week.
I'm sure you had no problem.
Well, I had no problem.
That is a good point though about the overtime, because I've seen people that they go buy that really expensive car and now I've got to work my overtime because I've gone out and spent too much money.
Yeah. And overtime is never a guarantee. Even I think a lot of people that work in the hospital get shocked as new nurses when censuses are really low. They'll call you off from your regular shift. You can be put on call on your regular shift and then you're making $2 an hour, or you have to do a PTO fill. And if you don't have PTO because you use all your PTO, that paycheck can get pretty skimpy sometimes. So I think it's important to talk about it. I think as elders in the community, it's good that we talk about it openly with the younger generation as well.
So where do you start? If a nurse comes in to you, Nick, and it's where do I start? I don't know anything about anything.
Yeah, I think understanding a budget of how much is coming in and how much is coming out, and that really dictates everything throughout the course of your life. If, you're only able to save for retirement or save for the future if you don't spend all your money. If you spend all your money, the rest of what we're going to talk about is not relevant because you can't do it. And so I think, the first thing isn't, hey, I want to, there's a number I need to get to, 10%, 20%. I think you work backwards and, okay, what are things I have to pay for? Do you have a car payment, utilities, house, rent, you have kids, whatever. Then there's going to be a discretionary amount of, okay, there's some money I can go on vacation with, entertainment I can save. And then you go from there. I think, the first thing, especially hospitals are relatively generous as far as offering a 401k and a match. And, 401k is just simply a retirement plan. I'll get into the options between a traditional Roth potentially later on, but it's a retirement plan where you get money taken out of your paycheck. Potentially the hospital matches, typically is 3%, 6% you put in your plan. And then that money just stays invested into the market for, the next, hopefully 20, 30, 40 years. You can't take money out until you're 59 and a half without avoiding a penalty. So it's an account that saves for long-term growth. And so I think establishing a budget, understanding, how much is coming in, how much has to go out, what amount do I have left over, and that amount left over, can I afford to save and invest some, is a really good place to start.
Tell us about your role then. So I've budgeted and I've got X amount of money to put towards my future. What does a financial planner, a certified financial planner do? Are you the person that we come and see? Should I be coming to you at 22? I'm not 22, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's varying degrees of advisors and also services and help. And so I think to, take a little step back, so I am what's called an independent fee-only advisor. And what that means is I'm not under any large company of Edward Jones, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, anything like that. And so fee-only also means that I can't, sell products, get commission. I only get paid directly from my clients. And I'm required to be a fiduciary, which means I'm legally required to act in your best interest at all times, which sounds obvious, hey, your advisor should do that. But those large firms, somebody who's not feeling it, they don't have to do that. Like I can be an advisor at Edward Jones and Morgan Stanley, and I don't have to act in your best interest. I could get commissions. I could put you in products. I don't have to tell you how much I'm paying. And guess what? I don't have to act in your best interest. It's like going to, a doctor or, a nurse and, at Bedside, she gets, an extra kick in if she gives me one drug versus the other. Well, she's probably going to give me the one that she gets a kickback on. It's kind of the same thing for advisors. So they can put you in investments. They can get kickbacks or commissions on the investments they put you in, and they don't have to tell you, and they don't have to do it in your best interest. So I think, which is bizarre, that's even allowed. And so I think, one, before we even get into how we help people, just if you are looking for an advisor or evaluating or thinking about it, you really need to understand how they get paid, what the incentive is, and do they have to act in my best interest? And what you're looking for is a fee-only financial advisor. If you hear fee-based, commission, you just need to walk out the door and run. Obviously, I'm biased. I own and run a fee-only firm, but you can look up, the definitions of what is fee-only versus fee-based and how are they paid. So, that's one. But two, there is really no way that, we don't help people in their lives. It's, when you're young, there's differing levels of needs, right? If you're 22 years old, you might not be married, you might not have kids, you might be single, dating, renting. So really at that point, you just try not to blow all your money and save as much as you can. And so I don't typically work with, people that young just because there's not a ton I can do or offer them. I think the real thing is just, hey, contribute to your 401k, save some in what's called a taxable brokerage account, which is just a regular investment account. You can open at Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, somewhere like that. And, just try not to get too deep in a car payment or, buy a house you can't afford. I think those are some practical steps early on. As you progress, throughout your career and you start making six figures, maybe you go to, nurse practitioner, maybe you become a doctor, maybe you have children, maybe you get married, maybe you buy a house, those needs certainly change. And so instead of, hey, I just need to, put money away in my 401k, that's when it turns to, well, there's also other types of accounts to invest in. You have, a Roth IRA, a Roth 401k, traditional IRA, and a regular brokerage account. How much do I put in each account and why do I put money there? Because when you do retire, or, hey, guess what? A lot of people don't want to work until they're 60. They want to retire early on. If all your money's in a 401k, you can't really do that. So it's really taking proactive planning to talk about that early on. And okay, if we retire early, where's that money going to come from? You have adequate life insurance. You have disability insurance outside of work. A lot of people only have life insurance or disability policies through their work. But guess what? If you get fired or leave, those are no longer, you have no more. And the earlier you get those, the cheaper they are. And so, and also estate planning, having a will and a trust, if something happens to you and your husband or you and your wife, what happens to your children? Who looks after them? Where does your money go? Who takes your money? At what age can your kids control that money? Those are all things that you need to think through early rather than later, because unfortunately I've seen a lot of instances where they keep kicking down the road, and then you wake up one day and it's too late. And so, really, we take the time to think through every single aspect of your life, whether it's cash flow planning, investment planning, retirement planning, tax planning. How do I pay as least amount of taxes as possible, which I think everyone will sign up for that one. So I think, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
tell me more.
Yeah, I haven't met anybody that wants to pay more taxes. And so we put a lot of emphasis on tax planning and how can we lower your tax bill, because there's a lot of proactive things we can do there. And so there's really, if you're working with the right advisor, there's, nothing that they can't help you with. And I think that's really important to, know, hey, your advisor, the industry's evolved, right? We don't pick stocks anymore, and I don't wear a suit and a tie and talk over your head and, walk you out the door and say, that's it. It's very in depth now. And so I think when you're differentiating, other advisors are potentially looking into it, one, understand how they get paid, and two, understand what they do for you. I've had plenty of clients come to me lately, prospects to turn into clients, and they are coming from another advisor at one of these big firms that's never looked at their tax return. I mean, it's literally, you can't do anything if you don't know anyone's tax situation. That's like going to the hospital or going to the doctor and you're telling them what's wrong with you, and they're standing in the corner with noise canceling headphones and a blindfold on. What's the point? It's unbelievable. And so, it's so important to understand that you have a good advisor, because not only will it cost you money, I mean, it can cost you, quality of life. I mean, I know multiple people who've got sold into an annuity And I mean, that's literally the difference of $500,000 to $700,000 in their life, which is also the difference of being able to retire now versus having to work 3 to 5 years longer. And so it's not, oh, I might make a little, miss a little there. There's serious ramifications of not knowing what you're doing when it comes to financial planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How could they not look at their tax returns? I don't understand.
It's
That
bizarre.
That is really crazy.
I mean, they
So
literally,
that's
yeah.
red flag.
Yeah.
If they don't ask for your tax returns, walk on out.
I mean, I literally talked to a woman yesterday who inquired on our website, and she had a Vanguard advisor. And the advisor, she made too much money last year, and she accidentally Vanguard told her to contribute to a Roth. Well, guess what? If you contribute to a Roth when your income's too high, you have to pay a pretty massive penalty to the IRS for doing so. Vanguard had never looked at her tax return, had no idea how much money she made. And so she was looking elsewhere. So, I mean, she had to pay thousands of dollars for that. And so it's just things like that, you think, oh, they're an advisor. They work at Vanguard, they work at wherever. It is tough because there's so much information. There's more information in the world now than there ever has been, that we have access to in the course of human history. So there's a lot to sift through, but I think just practical things. Is my advisor clued in on all these areas of my life? Because we're past the stage where an advisor just does investment. That's so 20 years ago. We've moved on.
Yeah, I got a Roth IRA penalty to taxes ago.
Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah.
Thankfully, mine wasn't 1,000. Like, we had just tipped over, and I'd forgotten about this Roth IRA that was automatically drawing money out that I set up when I was 21. And then I remembered about it, and then it was I think I had to pay a $500 penalty, but that still sucked.
Yeah, it still sucks. I mean, you can do a lot with $500. I mean, if I saw $500 laying on the ground, I'd push you over to get it. I mean, it's not something you just want to, let go.
I mean, it's a car payment as you started off with.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. So it is important. Obviously, my financial literacy continues to grow.
Yeah.
I'm just happy I know some of these words. I was like, yeah, I know.
Well, if I say something that you don't understand or that's not, what does that mean? Let me know, and I can.
I know what they mean, but it's like all the, like you just said, the penalties and stuff like that. So I know the differences, but I don't know those types of things, which is, I feel like, probably how a lot of people my age are.
Mm-hmm.
Just from talking with my friends and coworkers.
Well, I think so many of the millennials too, it was I think for so long we were told you're just going to have to work till you die anyways. There's going to be no Social Security. There's all these investment accounts. You're just going to have to work forever. And now that I'm older, I'm starting to realize that wasn't accurate. I should have learned this stuff in my 20s as opposed to just being well, I'm going to have to work till I die.
Yeah.
And also being a workaholic.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point about Social Security, especially for people that are, 45 and under. There's a real problem in that. I think there's over 4 people taking out of Social Security for every 2 people putting in. And so I think this year, next year, the fund that the government has to the payout, essentially, for those who don't know, Social Security is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. If you look into Bernie Madoff or how it's funded, you don't put money in 40 years ago, the government grows it for you and you get money out. That's not how it works. That's how they say it works. But essentially what happens is they take tax dollars that working professionals are putting in now to the Social Security fund. They use that to pay the Social Security claims, to people that are on Social Security. The issue is that baby boomers in that generation, they had so many more kids than people have had now or in the last 20 or 30 years. So you have significantly more people taking out of Social Security than putting in. And what that does is the money's going to run out eventually. And so I would be shocked if there's a world where they completely get rid of it, just because the average person who is on Social Security, that's literally their only income. They don't have retirement. If you look at the average American, that's all they have. Mm-hmm. So they can't necessarily do away with that because we're going to have mass homelessness or there's going to be a lot of issues. But for my younger clients, they're, essentially when we go through the financial plan, we can see what it looks like is, hey, how does your plan look if we reduce benefits by 20, 30, or 40%? Which I think is a very, very real possibility.
Yeah.
And so, I'm certainly not counting on it. Can I see the future? No. But there's one of two things are going to happen. They're going to have to increase tax rates, or they're going to have to pay you out less on Social Security. And so those are things that we need to prepare, for, especially for younger people, 45 and under, because that's a very real possibility.
Kaleigh, the one time being young.
I'm grouping with the young people now for that.
Kaleigh's like, wait, I'm in the young group now.
Yeah, y'all keep paying your taxes, please. I'm going to be needing that. But I think
it's Mike.
I hope I'm not messing up your outline.
1 year left till he...
That's right.
No.
1 year and 3 days, I'll have a Medicare card, and then it'll be sayonara.
Wow.
Yes. But hey, unless this is messing up your outline or anything, Abby, I think a lot of younger people, I've talked to so many new nurses because it's so important. But, maybe Nick can talk about why is it so important to start young versus why can't I spend and get my car and do all my stuff? And then, okay, when I'm in my 30s, I'll start planning, when really it's so important to start. As soon as you start your first job, it's important to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, an investing buzzword people use is compounding. What does compounding mean? Essentially, it means that if you invest for, long periods of time, that money grows on top of each other, on top, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger as exponential growth, And so, again, I have these slides up because I just spoke to Carolina a couple months ago. But I looked at, if let's say you make $150,000 and you just put away 10%, right? So that's $15,000 a year. What does that number look like if you do it for 10 years, 20 years versus 30 years? And we're growing it at 8%. I think it's important to know the growth rate. So if you look at, if you invest $15,000 for 10 years, after 10 years, you'll have $217,000, which is fine. If you invest it for 20 years, so $15,000 over 20 years, you'll have $686,000. So we've doubled the time, but we tripled our money. If we look at 30 years, saving $15,000 for 30 years, we're looking at $1.7 million. So it's the compounding is an exponential growth. It's not, well, if I start 5 years from now versus now, then that'll only be 5 years to that time. That's not necessarily how that works. And so starting to save early and often, that enhances your ability to get the compounding, to get the exponential growth. And again, there's obviously varying levels of not everybody, can save $15,000 a year or whatever it is. But the principle still applies that the earlier you start, the more time you give your money to work for you. And hopefully the earlier you can retire.
I think, Nick, it's really, and I've read this and seen it in Financial Freedom or whatever. There's the common statement that if you start at age 22 and put money away until you're 30 and then stop and never put in another dime, or you start at 30 and put in until you're 65, that one that started at 22 and only put in for 8 years will have more money when they turn 65 because of the compounding thing that you talked about.
Yeah, and essentially we just hit 100 years in the stock market. So looking back historically, your money, if it's in the market, S&P 500, whatever you look at, doubles every 7.5 years, which is pretty substantial. So we hope that's the case going forward. But again, the earlier you start now, I don't want, somebody's 35, 40, 45 listing and maybe I hadn't saved that much. There's still time, but those younger people listening, that it's incredibly important to set aside, an amount early on and just keep it going and really just live like that money doesn't exist can pay off big time later.
Uh-huh. I think that's one of the tricks is like when you get a new job, when you get a pay increase, put some of that money aside, increase your matching because you're not used to that. Like, you're not used to that extra money yet. And so that's one way where if like you're used to getting, let's say $1,500 every 2 weeks and then you get a pay raise and now you're going to get $1,800 every 2 weeks, take some of that $1,800 because you're already budgeted that way. And that's how I learned in my 20s to start being a little bit more proactive, and it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I'm not used to that extra $300.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's great.
That's really a good point, Abby, because when I was first starting, I'm sorry, that's a good point you made. When I was first starting, think I was doing your basic 5%. Then when I got a 2.5% raise, I just increased my 401 contribution by 2.5%. I mean, I did that on and on until I got to 15%. Just like you said, if you have it, you'll spend it. If you don't have it, you won't spend it. You'll find something to use it on if it's there.
If it's not there, especially healthcare workers, we're real thrifty. We're real crafty. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. So you spoke earlier about like a penalty if you make too much and with your Roth IRA, but for your 401k, you can increase your percentage of what you put into there without any penalties. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's still a cap though. So if you are under 50 years old, I believe right now they change it every year, but you can only put in a maximum of $24,500 a year in your 401k. That doesn't include the match. And depending on what hospital or your employer, there's called an overflow account where they can make more contributions on your behalf. If you're over the age of 50, you can make what's called a catch-up contribution, which typically, and now there's even more complex rules depending if you're 60 to 63. We won't get into all that, but essentially if you're over the age of 50, you can put in an additional, I think it's $8,500 a year to bring it up to, $31,000, $32,000 a year. So there are contributions there. And so the plan will just essentially cut. The majority of the plans now are smart. If you hit that limit, they'll just cut off your contributions and your paycheck would just increase by that amount. So, but then that's a good point because if you're used to saving that much, let's not just spend it, right? There's other investment accounts like individual or, just call it a brokerage account. It's just a regular investment account. You put money into, it's after tax money goes in. But when you sell and take the money out later, it's taxed a little more favorably. It's called capital gains tax. And essentially what that means is you're only taxed on the gain of the investment, right? So if I put $100,000 in, it grows to $150,000, I sell it and take it all out, I'm only taxed on the $50,000. And long-term capital gains rate for married filing jointly up to $500,000, roughly, it's about 15%. So it's lower than, your income tax bracket, but investing in the, that account, I think is incredibly important for young people because, what if I don't want to work until I'm 59 and a half or 60? There are some ways you can get your money out of a 401k without a penalty at 55, but you typically have to wait till 59 and a half. And so that brokerage account really gives us the ability to be flexible and when to retire. If we retire early, we can do something called Roth conversions, which, we could potentially get into later, but it just gives us more flexibility. But, that's a good point that if we do hit that limit there, doesn't mean going, spend it all. If you're used to saving that aside, there's other ways to, get that to work for you.
I was going to say, he's talking about how the stock market grows over time. And I remember, pretty early in my career, maybe it's in early 90s, the market took a real downturn and people were, quote, losing money, even though no, you didn't lose money. The value of it went down. But people were bailing out of their 401 when the market went down, which was exactly the opposite thing they should have been doing. I think it's important for people to know historically, it's up and down, but the trend continues to be up ever since the Great Depression.
Yeah, I mean, and that's plays into why a lot of people don't think they need an advisor now because they any person could have put their money in the S&P 500 or really most any stock or ETF over the last 15 years, and they would have looked like a genius just because we are in one of the biggest bull markets or, up markets ever. But people forget that from 2000 to 2009, the market was negative for 10 years. So, if you'd have put $100,000 into 2000, check back, January 1st, 2010, that $100,000 turned into 91,000. So you had lost 9,000 over 10 years. Now tech stocks, everyone wants AI, tech stocks, they want those, that sector of the market, was negative from 2000 to 2013. So for 13 years, so essentially from now until 2039, if you'd have put $100,000 into tech stocks, check back 13 years later, it only been worth 74,000. And, Michael brings up a good point is that you hadn't lost money until you sold, which is why we invest in low cost, broadly diversified, mutual funds or ETFs, but selling when the market's down can have a significant impact, on your portfolio. And one just last stat on that, if you look at the last 25 years and you look at the best week of the last 25 years, it actually happened in 2009, which was after the global financial crisis. But if you just missed that 1 week over a 25-year period, your portfolio would be less, 20% less than if you just stayed invested for that week. And so, if we miss the best 1 month or 3 months, your portfolio is down, 30% than it would have been. So there are a lot of people during COVID when the market was down 30% in 23 odd trading days that sold or were dying to sell. And guess what? That was the best 3-month period in the stock market after the bottom on March 23rd in the last 30 years. And so typically tremendous upswings in the market happen, after some downturns as well.
So your point is stay
Yeah.
and hold.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, it obviously depends on your circumstance, but, in the situation. Now, if we're talking about individual stocks and you put all your money in Bitcoin, I'm going to take you aside. We're going to have another conversation. But the market as a whole, I think, long term, what we're betting on is human innovation and ingenuity, and that, hey, we live in a capitalistic society. They're going to want to make money and pretty much do it at all costs. And that's what we're investing in, not a singular company or a theoretical coin. So I certainly have my thoughts there too.
I think that's an interesting way to talk about it. I don't think anyone has talked about the stock market in that way, that you're investing in innovation and kind of this capitalistic drive that we have in our society. I've never thought of it like that. But no Bitcoin. What were those images that people were into as well?
NFTs.
Yeah, NFTs.
It's something tokens or something. There was these apes. People were selling. Meta invested, I think, $70+ billion. It potentially was more than that in the metaverse, which is gone. And so, Bitcoin. Obviously, if you bought it 15 years ago, you certainly look like a genius now. But over the last couple of years, I think there's a 60%-ish difference in Bitcoin and the S&P 500 in the last year. And S&P's up, Bitcoin's down. So it's really understanding what we're invested in. If you invest, obviously, in the global market or the U.S., we're investing in all these companies where their main goal isn't to feel good. Their main goal is to make money. And that's what you're investing in. And, people get upset about who the president is or who's in Congress. At the end of the day, these companies, their job is to make money. And that's really what we're investing in, is that, that's why it's important to own thousands of individual stocks inside of a mutual fund or what's called an ETF, an exchange traded fund, which those are just vehicles that hold thousands of stocks in them. Because if you were to buy every single stock in the U.S. stock market, that would be several $100,000 to buy individual stocks. ETFs or mutual funds is an investment that allows us to do that at a much lower price. So we can be diversified there. So that's, what we're doing, primarily for clients, not picking individual stocks or Bitcoin or gold. Warren Buffett said gold doesn't do anything but sit there and look at you. And so, we invest in the market, and that companies are making money. Their goal is intention is to make money. And I think that's important to know, that when we go through these dips that we are going to go through at some point, it's not, if, it's when, to have that in the back of our minds.
So what about student loans? Because now we have nurses coming out with, undergrad nursing degrees with $80,000 in student loans. And the student loans have gotten absolutely crazy.
That's exactly.
So do you have does that even come into the financial planning world, or is that totally separate?
No, it does, Matt. There's really, if you have the right financial planner, there's nothing that doesn't come into that world. Kid, you get a new dog, you get a student loan. It all impacts your plan and your life. Student loans, like you mentioned, are interesting, where you have doctors, nurse practitioners, even nurses, surgeons, you name it, that are graduating with $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 in student loans. I met with a podiatrist last year. She was older, maybe 40, 45. She had $300,000 of student loan debt, hadn't done anything with it in the last decade or so. Now it was $600,000, $700,000. And she was like, yeah, for some reason, my paycheck's lower. People don't understand that if you don't pay your student loans, the government will garnish your wages and take the money from your paycheck to pay off the loan, which is a bad place to be, number one. But number two, Abby, I think it's important to know what type of loans you have. Probably we're alluding to the, what PSLF, the public service loan forgiveness. But there are still, criteria on that you have to make, regular payments for 10 years. It has to be direct loans from the government. Some people might work for a hospital, but they took out private loans and those don't qualify.
Right.
And so, they might making the minimum payment, which also is not the right thing to do, because when, during COVID, then when they paused student loan interest, the majority of America just stopped paying it. Now, granted, there wasn't interest on it at that time, but you were given a gift of no interest loans that you could be paying down for years. And most people didn't take advantage of that. So it's something that needs to be evaluated, and also looking into that. What's the interest rate, right? Because if your interest rate is 2, 3, 4%, maybe we can be a little less aggressive. But I've seen people that are in the 10 range, where it's like, okay, that needs to be number one priority, because until we get that taken care of, we're really, being held back. So it definitely goes into the financial plan, but I think, it's important to understand what type of loan you have, and one, does it even qualify for the, loan forgiveness? Because a lot of people think it does, and they'll check back 7, 8 years later and they took out private loans and they can't get the forgiveness, and they've been making minimum payments. So it's important to understand that, and also the interest rate you have on the loan. Hey, should we be aggressive in paying this off? Or if it's 3%, we can get more than that, in a money market fund right now. So let's make the minimum payments, and then anything we have left over at the end of the year, we'll make a lump sum on it. So there's definitely strategies behind that, and it's certainly, client dependent.
Yeah. I will say, again, like, going, and everyone's situation in COVID was varied. I do understand that, but thankfully, working in healthcare, we were very secure during COVID. And again, I didn't, because my student loan was already budgeted into my budget. I was so grateful during that time, those 2 years where that interest was paused. I actually increased, because I was like, I started to see how much quicker I was able to chip away at these loans, and I was able to get those master's loans down so much because of that. It was such a gift.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the things too, that whether you're a new nurse or new in medicine, or you're going to go back for another degree, like, knowing the type of loans, because again, I didn't have undergraduate loans. I didn't get my first student loan until my master's. So I was already like 26, and I kind of, you would think I knew something, but someone was like, yeah, take out all of it. They're offering you $80,000, take the $80,000. And that was terrible advice.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. A lot of people will, take out as much as they can, or, they may want to go to a school that they really can't afford, but, people will loan you as much money as you want. And that's things that people don't understand, that it's not a flex to, go to a more expensive school just because you got a loan for it. They're looking their chops, when you sign up for that. So I think just understanding the terms of the loan and getting familiar with that is definitely important.
You've given us a lot. I want to kind of sidestep us a little bit and hear from Michael, with all of his years of experience. And I know, because I've seen you sit and have these same conversations that we're having with young nurses at the nurses station. You've had these conversations with me in our office when we work together. Why has this become such a passion for you? Why? And you glad, we're so happy you reached out to us with this idea to talk about it, but why? Tell us what you've seen. Why is this such a passion for you, Michael?
I think mostly because, I saw when I grew up, it was a single paycheck household with my dad, and there was zero financial planning on his behalf. Fortunately for him, there was the state retirement stuff that doesn't really exist anymore. Companies don't have retirement plans and work for us 30 years and you're going to make a salary the rest of your life like they used to. And like Nick said earlier, the whole thing with Social Security, it's going to go away, or at least go away as we know it. It's already going away as we know it. I was looking a few weeks ago, and I think if I start taking money out when I'm 67, I will get about $3,800 a month. And that's not chump change, but that's, not what I'm used to. And I think I've nurses have such, or anyone in healthcare, if you do the math and I've sat down last week and said, if you're a new nurse making the $33 an hour that we make, that I think is the minimum now at the hospital, or at a lot of hospitals, somewhere in that range. And if you take the company match and never get a raise for 35 years, you would still have $2 million in your account if you started at 22 and went to 65, and the market keeps growing. So, I think I want to see people be successful and learn from the things I didn't know. So you can say, hey, you really can be a millionaire in healthcare, even as a nursing assistant. If you are wise, you can be a millionaire when you turn 65, and you're not dependent on the government. You're not dependent on anyone, because you have planned for yourself. And I think that's that's important to me. I know Nick's not a Dave Ramsey fan, but he does make the comment, when you're young, live like no one else, so that when you're older, you can live like no one else. And when you get old and hopefully are still healthy, you want to be able to travel and do things and have fun, and not sit around and wish I had done this and wish I had done that. And so for me, at my point now, to say, oh, I wish I had done, well, I can tell younger people what I wish I had done, so that maybe they can actually do that and will be in a better spot than I am.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think? And Nick, you kind of touched on it, but those of us in healthcare, why do you think some of these conversations are so hard for us to even have? Like, talking about our paychecks, talking about that. Like, why are we all hustling? Why are we all struggling?
I think a lot of it's psychological. One, in the fact that, if you're a good nurse or, nurse practitioner, doctor, I don't think you're a slouch or you don't try to work hard. I think, not that you're obsessed with work, but it is an obsessive culture, and that it becomes, your personality. It becomes, so much about you. In nursing, I think, unique in that aspect that a lot of companies aren't. Like if I'm working for IT at Google, or construction company, maybe I don't have the same love or community that nurses do. And so I think from that mindset, it just becomes just gotta work, gotta go. And it's hard to turn your brain off if that's how you think. And so I think that's the first part of it, right? And you can disagree with me, but after
No, I was going to say, you sound like the husband of a healthcare worker.
Yeah, he's like, we're know-it-alls and we're insufferable.
He's
And it's our whole personality.
sit through many a story time.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing, but right
No,
you're right.
When you watch
You're
somebody
right.
die or save somebody's life or whatever, that brings you far closer than working on an Excel sheet together.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into so much of who you are in your life. If that's your job, like you're saving people's lives and you're watching people die, or you have to go through that, that's going to impact you significantly more than 99% of jobs. And so I think just a nature of being, hard worker, hustler, what have you, it kind of breeds, that, well, what do I have to do to make more? What do I have to do to make more? But, a lot of that's just, hey, you don't have to buy a brand new car that your friends have, or in the new neighborhood or whatever, but really just setting, the money aside and kind of tuning out that noise of a lot of the, financial decisions around you. Because believe it or not, the average American is in significant credit card debt. When I tell, my wife that, she just doesn't believe it. But I mean, if you look, over 50% of Americans have significant credit card debt, and people don't really realize that. They see the new car, the new house, doing this for the last 10 years, I've been doing it. Just because you have things is not indicative at all of how much money you have. I mean, not at all.
Yeah.
I've seen, a husband and wife couple who were managers at a Food Lion retire at 60 years old with $2 million. They worked at Food Lion for 25, 30 years. And so they're, and they started as a clerk and worked their way up. So much of it is you are so close and you're around other people and you're seeing everything they're doing. It's, well, I got to get that. I got to have that. I got to do that. When that, is kind of digging you into a hole a little bit.
Yeah.
My mom calls it being house poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you buy the big house, but then you're poor because you can't do anything. You have no other money.
Yeah.
which you could apply to a lot of stuff. What do you consider for people? You said so many people are in significant credit card debt. Like, what does that mean? What's like, is there a number? Is it like a percentage of what you make? Like, how do you define like significant credit card debt?
I would say significant. I mean, I'm not making up a number, but significant is anything that I can't pay for out of my cash and be okay with it right now. That to me is significant because that means we have a problem. And so, I don't think it's necessarily because $20,000 in a credit card debt to you might be different than a $200,000 credit card debt to a neurosurgeon who's bringing in a couple million a year or whatever. So I think there's varying levels of degree, but to my definition, significant is something that I can't pay off immediately. Or if I did, there would be some issues somewhere else. Not that I think credit cards are bad because you can get rewards, you can increase your credit score and all that. I just think if you do use a credit card, you need to get into the habit. If you have trouble with maintaining it, as soon as you make a payment, just like there's no amount of times you can make a payment. I can make 500 payments a month on my credit card. As soon as you make a payment, just go pay it off from your account. Go pay it off immediately. And that just changes your mindset. On the topic of spending, when Haley and I first got married, I had an Excel spreadsheet, and everything that we bought, we had to put in the spreadsheet. So there are a lot of things that I don't really want to buy that because then I got to go into it, got to put it in there. I think that's a pretty interesting strategy to say, hey, each person, put it, you have to manually do that. And you're like, wow, we spent, $300 eating out. We only ate out a couple of times because things add up so quickly. But once you see it, it kind of quantifies it a little bit.
That gave me such a visceral reaction, but actually I think that is a good idea because the people who want to complain about the person who spends too much money maybe don't realize how much they're spending.
Yeah. I will say I developed my first true budget during COVID after, contributing to the economy and doing a lot of Uber Eats and DoorDash. And I calculated my DoorDash and I was like,
yeah,
I'm not even going to say the number. It was bad.
Yeah, DoorDash and Uber Eats and eating out is just it gets obscene with how much people spend.
It was bad. It was bad spending. It was bad on my body. It was bad all around. But, well, I thank you guys so much for coming on and opening up these discussions. As we close out, what is one thing you're taking away from this discussion or you hope a listener takes away from this discussion? I'll let you start, Michael.
Okay. I think, Nick said it early on and Kaleigh just mentioned it briefly just now, is that most of us in healthcare, we're educated, we have advanced degrees, you have your doctorate from Yale, but nowhere in your doctorate from Yale did they teach you about money. I would not want Nick to intubate me. Because that's not what he does. And finance is not what I do. And so I think he made a good point about you take a step back and be humble and go, hey, you know what? I don't know everything about this. Really, I don't know a lot at all. So if I get somebody who does involved, I'm going to be doing much better for myself in the long run. And even for just a short term that I've had, a planner, oh, wow, my accounts are growing at a rate significantly more than what I'm making per year in salary. So I'm trying to set myself up for the future. So I guess the 2-word answer is get help.
That's what I was going to say. I think my takeaway is I need to get financial advice. Fee only.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you. Yes. Fee only.
I wanted to do that for years. For many reasons, it didn't happen, but I think you made such a good point about that. And that's my takeaway.
I'm along with Michael, and you are the subject matter expert. And I think that's really such a good analogy of we don't expect you to know how to take care of yourself. You come to us for help. We should go to people that are experts in this. And I am reminded of one of our guests that comes on, Ava. One of her favorite quotes is she doesn't want her doctor worrying about anything. And so we don't want them worrying about finances. We shouldn't be worrying about our finances when we're taking care of our patients. And so getting subject matter experts to help in that will help you be able to focus on your career and your job better. So I think that's the big thing for me that I really enjoyed.
Yeah,
What's
you don't want to have somebody taking care of you that's so tired because they've had to work so many extra shifts
no.
because they can't not,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just exhausted, or they worked 5 or 6 days in a row.
Mm-hmm. You don't want to put your license at risk because you've had to work so many shifts and you're tired, or get stuck accidentally with a dirty needle, get some infectious disease because you're so tired. Like real things that happen. So, all right, Nick, what's one takeaway you hope everyone gets?
Yeah, I think, Kaleigh and Michael said it too. I think it's, get help, or at least, talk to somebody who does this for, a living. Because, especially if you're younger, if you make a mistake, we talked about compounding of interest, but mistakes can also compound. And so I think that's important to, know is that, if we make mistakes early on, or we try to do it ourselves, and some things we can do ourselves, but that compounds too. And it's not that, I said earlier that, a lot of doctors or, whoever think they know everything. But, I think because they are so smart, but it is impossible to know everything. Our brains can only take so much, and we can't be, nobody can be an expert in everything. So I think, know your limitations and, what I am good at, and I'm going to hire somebody who's better at that than I am. And I think that can apply a lot of areas in our life, just even outside of finance.
Yeah. Like my housekeeper. It was better by a long guy. That's better at my lawn than me. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. Please send us in your financial questions. We're happy to bring Nick back to answer them. Send them his way so he can maybe make some social media posts for us and answer them. We are happy to send that on. As always, from all of us here at Banter at the Bedside, until next time, bye.
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 If this felt like your kind of conversation, make sure you're following, leave us a review, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye.
Step into the light where the stories hum.